With the new region release, it's inevitable that one of the hottest topics is Lahai Roi's Threnodian. Even though we don't know much, there's actually a boatload of estimated guessing and extrapolation that we can do from the details that we do know and we do have. And there is a lot to talk about. So let's start off with the facts. For one, we know that the Threnodian, designated Aleph-1, utilizes the Voidstorm to erase the existence of entities from memory. While Jinzal's Otherthrax has a theme of war, and Renacita's Leviathan has a theme of assimilation, Aleph-1 has a theme of ontology, or of existence itself. We've already gotten some references to famous people who have studied ontology before, such as Professor Anselm, who is named after Anselm of Canterbury, who analysed ontology of God within the Proslogion. When we look at the name Aleph-1, we can also see some interesting links to Aemeath, another interesting name that popped up in 3.0. While you can watch my Aemeath video for a better explanation, the gist of it is that when you erase the first letter Aleph of the Hebrew word Aemeath, you transform the meaning from divine truth to death. This is because the Hebrew letter Aleph, which is the first letter of the alphabet, is symbolic of the beginning and God's creation. If there is no beginning, then there is only death, only non-existence. And this leads me to another aspect of the Wuthering Way as well that I've been mulling over for quite a long time. Within Iona's story, we are introduced to the dimension of chaos, which interestingly has never been mentioned again after the 2.7 update. According to Grandmother Lilybet, chaos is a place of totality, of everything, of all cause and effects. This links to Greek mythology, which of course Septimon draws heavily from, where a state of chaos also exists. At the beginning of the world, there existed nothing, from which everything emerged and the world began. While chaos is oftentimes seen as a void of nothing, it is also paradoxically everything at the same time, because everything has to emerge from it. It is a state of totality, of infinity, of every possibility which the world emerges from. And if we consider this plane of chaos as essentially a beginning, of where the world emerges from, then our previous theory of Aleph, being a Hebrew character that symbolizes the beginning and creation, begins to fall into place. Perhaps the Threnodian Aleph-1 actually erases the existence of entities by plunging them into chaos, or some sort of state where they have not existed. Considering that the Academy can track that Aleph-1 does not share the same source of other Threnodians, and it takes the shape of a black hole-like entity, it's very likely that it exists either in space or some other separate plane of being, such as chaos. This also lines up with the ominous radio message that we get in Hanami City in 2.8. Perhaps what is meant when the universe has rejected us is that existence and being itself can no longer be maintained. It's a very interesting thing to think about. However, this is only the Academy's perspective. When we first talk to Miss Voss in 3.0, there is a single lore panel that gives us a massive amount of information about not just Lahai Roi's Threnodian, but also the Exostrider and the wider 3.0 story. Within it, we are introduced to the Royan Trine myth, where we can very clearly see that the way the Roya see the Exostrider and the Threnodian is inspired by Norse mythology and Ragnarok, the battle that will end the world. Within it, the Exostrider, known as Baldur, which is very interesting already as it links the real Baldur, the son of Odin, is not as fascinating as what the Roya call Lahai Roi's Threnodian, Aleph-1, being Venrungr, which in real life is a transliteration of an alternate name of a Norse god that you may already be very familiar with, being Loki. Now, Loki is a god of chaos and cunning, and considering that he does not have a single form but can basically become or take on anything, we can already see some links to what we talked about in regards to Aleph-1, being totality, infinity, and chaos. While I'm not very mathematically inclined, Aleph-1 seems to also symbolize the smallest infinity within set theory, but the math bros are going to have to help me out on that one. Regardless, what's also very interesting is that the Roya in the same passage believe that Baldur and Venrungr are destined to fight in a grand apocalyptic battle. This is very obviously a reference to Ragnarok, a series of events in Norse mythology that lead to the end of the world. Now, Ragnarok is a bit of a contentious topic, but for the sake of understanding, I'll be using the version within the Völuspá in the Poetic Edda. Within it, Baldur's death is one of the first events that kickstarts Ragnarok, which seems to foreshadow that something very ominous is going to be happening with the Exostrider. We know that currently, the Exostrider is slumbering but also pinning down the Threnodian Aleph-1, or Venrungr, with its sword. If Baldur, the Exostrider, were to die or lose its grip in some way, then that would mean that Venrungr, or Loki, would essentially escape containment, wreaking havoc and starting the Wuthering Waves equivalent of Ragnarok. It's very likely as well that this is the Thraxidus' entire plan. To place more substance on this reference, if we are to compare Ragnarok to the events happening in Lahai Roi, then there is one more thing that really stands out. Within the Völuspá, Jormungandr, Loki's child and the World Serpent, begins to act strangely, thrashing about in the ocean and reaching land, being another one of the famous signals that Ragnarok is beginning. If you think about it a little, it's actually quite clear that the Voidworm that we confront in 3.0, which begins to act abnormally and try to attack the Academy, is Jormungandr. Just like how Jormungandr is the child of Loki, the Voidworm is a being created by Aleph-1, the Threnodian, and as we know now, Loki. The catastrophe it caused in 3.0 is essentially the beginning of the end of times, being Ragnarok. There are more references to Norse mythology around the map of Lahai Roi that point towards this. For example, the Royan people around the map constantly talk about the world above with great reverence, talking about how their ancestors were banished underground. In Norse mythology, the world is made up of 9 levels that are all connected through the world tree, Yggdrasil, with humans living in a place called Midgard. Midgard was formed from the body of the giant Ymir, whose corpse formed trees, mountains, rivers, plains, and whatnot. And we can see that Lahai Roi, built off of the Exostrider's body, with the echoes of the region, the solar skin, and the reactor drive that makes an underground ecosystem like the Beata Woods possible, is basically an analogue of the giant Ymir. The Exostrider's sword, which pierces from the frostlands above, through Lahai Roi and goes even deeper to pin down the Threnodian underground, is basically the same as a Norse world tree, Yggdrasil. The Threnodian's chaos dimension we talked about before may even be linked to one of the 9 worlds in Norse mythology, being Helheim, the land of the dead on the lowest level of Yggdrasil, while the world above, being the Frostlands, we can guess, with the Exostrider, is most likely an analogue of Asgard, where the gods such as Baldur reside. If we take the Exostrider's sword as Yggdrasil, then one of the first things that happens in Ragnarok is actually Yggdrasil being damaged, because the dragon Nifogr begins to chew at its roots. This is followed by terrible things happening in Midgard, which we've already talked about with the Voidworm or Jormungandr in Lahai Roi, before eventually the fight reaches the world above, or Asgard, where the climactic battle of Ragnarok concludes. Within Wuthering Waves, this probably means that Ragnarok begins with rumblings in Midgard, being the Voidworm incident, before something underground happens with the roots of Yggdrasil, probably being, for example, the underground Threnodian slipping out from the Exostrider's sword, before the final climactic battle happens in Asgard, or the Frostlands above Lahai Roi. It's something that seems to already be in motion. When you look around the lore of Lahai Roi, it's very clear that the current status quo is unsustainable. It's been mentioned that the current amount of Exoswarm is not enough to properly repair the Exostrider, and that the equilibrium of it pinning down the Threnodian is untenable. Although many of the lore entries are redacted, based on what we've gone through in the video, It seems to be mentioned that the opening of some sort of chaos dimension with the Threnodian Aleph-1, or Loki, alongside it, is inevitable, regardless of whether the entrance is opened by the Academy or by the Threnodian themselves. And this all matches up, as we know already, that symbolically, one of the essential steps of Ragnarok is Baldur's, or the Exostrider's, supposed death. However, if we look further within the Völuspá and Ragnarok, there is a slight silver lining. At the end of Ragnarok, Baldur, who is symbolically linked to the Exostrider, doesn't actually die. He escapes the land of the dead, Helheim, governed by Loki's daughter Hel, and is effectively resurrected by the end of Ragnarok. So while these are all of course just theories and speculations, it seems almost set in stone that something terrible is going to happen to the Exostrider, aided by perhaps what the Thraxidus are doing in Lahai Roi, that results in its death and the beginning of Ragnarok and the breaking out of Aleph-1 within its realm of chaos. However, after facing more of Venrunga's monsters, perhaps being inspired by Loki's actual children in Norse mythology, being Jormungandr, the world serpent, Fenrir the wolf, and Hel, the goddess of death, it seems that the Exostrider will eventually face Venrunga in a battle to the death. Before perhaps being revived. It's definitely some interesting things in store for the Lahai Roi story. It seems that the Threnodian Aleph-1, otherwise known as Venrunga or Loki, is already beginning to make its move, starting the chain of Ragnarok.